Welcome to our deep dive into the world of Tibetan mountain gods. You just picture it, the Himalayas, those towering peaks shrouded in mist and legend. Each mountain is home to a powerful deity shaping the lives of the people below.
A really unique and fascinating belief system.
Definitely. We'll be exploring some academic excerpts about these gods, their hierarchy, and their impact on Tibetan culture.
Right.
Get ready for yak-riding deities, shape-shifting powers, and even a connection to the legendary King Gizzar.
It's amazing how deeply intertwined those beliefs are with the actual landscape and history of Tibet.
Okay, let's dive into this. I'm curious about the hierarchy of these mountain gods. The sources mention that as Tibetan society evolved, these once independent deities were sort of woven into this complex system,
Right.
ultimately culminating in one supreme deity.
Yes.
What's interesting is that different regions had their own top gods,
Yeah.
creating these similarities and even contradictions at the top of this divine system. How did Tibetans reconcile those conflicting beliefs?
It's a great question. You see, the idea of a single supreme god likely emerged as different tribes and regions came together to form a more unified Tibetan identity.
Interesting.
It's a pattern we see in many cultures as they evolve. The need to create a more unified belief system,
Right.
even if it means incorporating diverse and sometimes conflicting traditions.
So it was a way of bringing order to a complex world and establishing a kind of divine authority.
Yes, exactly.
Does this mean that the lesser gods became less important?
Not really. They still held significant power in their own domains. It's kind of like a pyramid.
Okay.
The supreme deity at the top, but the structure is supported by all the deities below.
Okay, that makes sense. So who are some of the big players in this divine power structure?
Well, we have the big four, each linked to a specific sacred mountain. Yar-lha-sham-po, gnyan-chen-thang-lha, Skula-rizhya, and Vodagungro.
Okay.
And these four, along with 5 other prominent mountain gods, make up the core of the Tibetan mountain god system, known as the 9 creator gods.
9 creator gods. Sounds like an exclusive club.
Yeah.
Let's start with yar-lha-sham-po.
Okay.
He's often called the royal god,
Right.
and he's associated with the Yarlung River Valley, the cradle of Tibetan civilization. He sounds like a pretty powerful figure.
He is indeed. Yar-lha-sham-po's story is particularly interesting because he was a staunch follower of Bon, the native Tibetan religion,
Okay.
and fiercely resisted the arrival of Buddhism in Tibet. There's even a myth about him causing a massive flood to destroy a Buddhist palace.
Wow. He was serious about protecting his turf. It's interesting that his rise to prominence seems to mirror the Yarlun tribe's own growth and dominance, eventually becoming rulers of all of Tibet.
Yeah.
Almost like the god and the tribe were on this journey together.
It's a great observation. You see how the divine and the historical intertwine in these myths.
Right.
And Yar-lha-sham-po's image evolves along with this rise to power. In early myths, he's depicted as a powerful white yak, symbolizing the raw power of nature. But later, as the Yarlung tribe gained influence, he transformed into a more regal figure,
Interesting.
a man-god in white wielding a spear and crystal sword, symbols of both earthly and spiritual authority.
So he becomes this embodiment of both the tribe's power and their connection to the divine. What about his wife?
Right.
It wouldn't be a proper power couple without a formidable female figure.
You're right. His wife, Namsman-thagi-buyug, is no mere consort. She rides lightning bolts with hailstones in her hand, representing the fierce energy of the storms
Wow.
that could both nourish and destroy.
That's quite an image. She embodies the duality of nature, both life-giving and destructive. Okay, moving on to gnyan-chen-thang-lha, also known as Thang-lha, considered one of the most famous mountain gods. What makes him stand out?
His story is fascinating because it shows how these deities evolved over time.
Okay.
He started as a hail god, but later became a guardian of treasure.
So he went from controlling the potentially destructive force of hail to protecting wealth and prosperity. That's quite a shift. How do we know so much about him?
There's a detailed prayer text dedicated to him that reveals his lineage and describes his home. It says that he's the son of Vodagungurgil, another powerful mountain god,
Okay.
and a single-winged jade bird.
A single-winged jade bird. Now, that's an origin story you don't hear every day. Where does this unique god reside?
According to the prayer text, he lives in a place called Vidamshan, where a jade-green bird keeps things lush and green even in the depths of winter.
That jade bird sounds magical, almost like a symbol of life and abundance, even in the harshest conditions.
It is a powerful image,
Yeah.
and gnyan-chen-thang-lha is often imagined as a white man symbolizing purity and power.
Okay.
But there are other traditions where he's depicted as a fearsome hail god demanding sacrifices.
So he's got a benevolent side and a more intimidating side, reflecting that duality of nature again. Does he have a wife, too?
He does. Local beliefs say that his wife is a goddess who resides in a lake on the mountain.
It seems even gods value companionship.
Yes.
Now, before we move on to the next mountain god, I want to talk about a word that keeps coming up in our source material, yen.
Yeah.
It's in the names of many mountain gods and even the mountains themselves. What is the significance of this word?
Yan is a fascinating word with multiple layers of meaning. It originally referred to a wild sheep, or argali, a fierce and untamable animal that roamed the high plateaus of Tibet.
Okay.
These animals were both hunted and feared by ancient Tibetans, and their power and elusiveness led to their worship.
So like wolves in other cultures, both respected and feared.
Exactly. And because of the Jan's connection to the untamed mountains, it eventually became associated with demons and spirits.
Okay.
Over time, Yan evolved into a general term for demon or monster in Tibetan.
So it went from a real animal to a symbol of the wild, untamed forces of nature, and finally to a more general term for supernatural beings. That's a pretty amazing evolution.
It is, and this evolution reflects the complex relationship between humans and the natural world.
Yeah.
A relationship that's both awe-inspiring and terrifying. And this fear of the Nyan wasn't just confined to the mountains or the realm of spirits. It permeated many aspects of Tibetan life, including their understanding of health and disease.
It's fascinating how this concept of the Nyan evolved from a wild sheep to a powerful demon. So these Nyan weren't just these abstract figures lurking in the mountains. They actually had the power to, impact people's lives, even their health.
That's right. Tibetans believed that the Nyan could invade the human body and cause disease. In fact, the word Nyan can also mean disease in Tibetan.
So you're telling me that a word that started out describing a wild sheep eventually became synonymous with illness?
Yes.
That's incredible. What kinds of illnesses were attributed to these Nyan?
Well, various ailments were thought to be caused by Nyan, including things like tetanus, nephritis, and even mental illnesses. These Nyan were seen as these malevolent forces that could disrupt the balance and harmony of the body.
That must have been a frightening concept, to live with the idea that these invisible entities could invade your body and make you sick.
It was definitely a powerful belief, and it shaped the way Tibetans approached healing and medicine. They developed specific remedies and rituals aimed at combating the Nyan. Some remedies even had names like Nyan-to-pa, meaning anti-Nyan, or Nyang-sod, meaning young killer.
So they weren't just passively accepting their fate, they were actively fighting back against these Nyan using their knowledge of medicine and spirituality. That's a testament to human resilience, isn't it?
It is. Even in the face of fear and uncertainty, humans find ways to cope and create meaning. The Yan, despite its negative connotations, ultimately contributed to the development of sophisticated medical practices in Tibet.
It's a reminder that even our fears can drive innovation and progress. We've been talking a lot about these individual mountain gods and the Nyan.
Right.
But I want to shift gears a bit and talk about the bigger picture. Why were these mountain gods so crucial to the Tibetans? What kind of power did they hold over people's lives?
Well, we touched on it earlier, but their control over the weather was paramount. Wind clouds, thunder, hail, all these forces were believed to be under the command of these mountain gods.
And in a land like Tibet where weather can make or break a harvest, these gods held immense power. They weren't just figures of myth and legend, they were forces to be reckoned with in a very real sense.
Exactly. Their power was tangible and directly impacted the lives and livelihoods of the people. That's why appeasing them through rituals and offerings was so vital. It was about ensuring not just spiritual well-being, but also survival.
Speaking of rituals, what kinds of ceremonies did Tibetans perform to honor their mountain gods? I can imagine them being pretty elaborate.
They were indeed. Offerings played a huge role with people presenting food, incense, and even animals to appease the gods and seek their favor. These ceremonies could range from simple individual offerings at local shrines to grand communal rituals led by religious specialists.
So a real mix of personal devotion and communal practice. Did these rituals differ depending on the specific mountain god or region of Tibet? Or was there a standard format?
There were definitely regional variations and ceremonies tailored to specific deities. Each mountain god had their own preferences and protocols, so to speak, but the underlying purpose was the same: to show respect, seek protection, and maintain a harmonious relationship with these powerful beings.
It sounds like a complex system, but also a very human one. This desire to connect with something larger than ourselves, to find meaning and purpose in the face of the unknown. I guess that's what religion is all about, isn't it?
Yes.
But tell me, who are the people performing these rituals? Was it just everyday folks, or were there specialized priests or shamans involved?
Both, actually.
Uh,
Ordinary people would make offerings at local shrines or sacred sites. But for more complex ceremonies, religious specialists played a key role.
okay.
They had the knowledge and skills to navigate the intricacies of these rituals and ensure they were performed correctly.
They were like the intermediaries between the human and divine realms, bridging the gap between everyday life and the world of the gods.
Exactly. They held a position of great respect within Tibetan society. It was a weighty responsibility, and they were entrusted with maintaining that vital connection between the people and the mountain gods.
I'm getting this sense that these mountain gods were truly woven into the fabric of Tibetan life. Not just these distant deities residing on high peaks, but active participants in people's lives, influencing everything from the weather to their health and well-being.
That's a great way to put it. They weren't just mythological figures, they were living presences shaping the landscape, the seasons, and even the human experience. Their stories provided a framework for understanding the world and one's place within it.
We've talked about the hierarchy of these mountain gods, their unique stories, and the rituals associated with them. But what about the overarching themes or messages within this whole system of belief?
Right.
What can we learn from these myths beyond the fascinating details?
That's a key question to consider. One of the most profound takeaways, I believe, is the deep respect for nature that permeates Tibetan culture. The way these mountain gods embody the forces of nature, the weather, the untamed wilderness, it all points to this awareness of humanity's interconnectedness with the natural world.
It's like they're saying, we're not separate from nature, we're part of it, and we need to live in harmony with it.
Precisely. And that message is as relevant today as it was centuries ago. Another essential thing is the interconnectedness of everything,
Okay.
not just with nature, but within the divine realm as well.
We see that in the intricate family ties and lineages connecting the mountain gods, and even in the concept of the heavenly rope, which we haven't really explored yet.
Right.
That rope linking the earthly realm to the celestial is such a powerful image of unity and continuity.
It is, and it suggests that there's this invisible web connecting everything from the highest mountain peaks to the heavens above. It's a reminder that we're all part of something larger than ourselves.
Yeah.
And our actions have ripple effects that extend beyond our immediate sphere.
That's a powerful thought. Before we get too philosophical, I want to circle back to our source material.
Sure.
Is there anything else in the text that you think we should highlight before we move on?
Yes, actually. There's this fascinating passage that talks about the historicization of Tibetan mythology.
Historicization. You mean how these myths were woven into the actual history of Tibet?
Exactly. As Tibetan society developed and began recording their history, they started incorporating these myths into their chronicles, blending the stories of gods and kings.
It wasn't just about preserving the stories, it was about linking their present to their past, creating a sense of continuity and legitimacy for their culture.
Precisely. And the mountain gods played a key role in that process. Remember how we discussed the first kings being considered descendants of heavenly beings?
Right, it was like the mountain gods provided this divine link between the rulers of Tibet and the heavens.
Exactly. And this process of historicization is crucial to understanding how these myths evolved over time. They weren't just static stories passed down unchanged, but dynamic narratives that were constantly reshaped and reinterpreted to fit the changing needs of Tibetan society.
It's fascinating how they were able to adapt these ancient beliefs to new contexts and make them relevant to their evolving understanding of the world. It speaks to the enduring power of myth, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It shows how myths can serve as a bridge between the past and the present, providing a framework for meaning and identity that transcends time.
Okay, I'm starting to grasp the depth and complexity of this whole belief system, but I have to admit my brain is starting to feel a bit overloaded with all this information.
I understand. It's a lot to process.
Yeah.
And it's important to give ourselves time to reflect on what we've learned and let those ideas settle in.
Before we move on to our final part, I think our listeners could use a little time to digest everything we've covered so far. Join us in part 3 as we wrap up our deep dive into Tibetan mountain gods and explore how these beliefs have endured and perhaps transformed in the modern world. We've journeyed through this fascinating landscape of yak-riding deities, shape-shifting powers, and even those demonic wild sheep.
It's quite a world.
It really is. And I have to say, I'm in awe of the richness and depth of these beliefs. It's amazing how these myths weren't just like static stories, but they were living narratives,
Right.
adapting and evolving right alongside Tibetan society.
It really highlights that enduring power of myth
Yeah.
and its ability to provide like a framework for understanding the world, even as that world changes around us.
Exactly. Speaking of change, I'm curious how these ancient beliefs have endured or perhaps transformed in modern Tibet,
Sure.
especially with the arrival of Buddhism, which brought a whole new set of spiritual ideas and practices to the region.
Yeah, that's a great question. Buddhism didn't completely replace the older beliefs. It was more of a merging or blending of traditions.
So it's not a case of out with the old, in with the new, more like finding ways to integrate those ancient beliefs into this new spiritual framework.
Precisely. Many mountain gods were assimilated into the Buddhist pantheon, becoming protectors of the Dharma or guardians of specific monasteries. Their attributes and powers were sometimes reinterpreted through a Buddhist lens.
It's like they were given new roles to play in the cosmic order of things.
Right.
But I imagine the core belief in their existence and influence persisted, especially in more remote communities where those traditional practices remain strong.
You're absolutely right. Even today, in many parts of Tibet, you'll find people making offerings to the mountain gods, seeking their blessings and protection. It's a testament to the enduring power of those beliefs and their continued relevance in people's lives.
It's fascinating how these ancient beliefs can coexist alongside these newer religions or ideologies. It speaks to that human need to connect with something larger than ourselves, whether we call it the divine or the sacred or simply the power of nature.
I agree. And those beliefs, even if they've transformed over time, still provide a sense of meaning and identity, a way of anchoring oneself in a world that can often feel chaotic and uncertain.
So even in the face of modernization and globalization, these mountain gods haven't faded into obscurity.
No.
They're still vital presences in the lives of many Tibetans.
Exactly. They're not just relics of the past. They're a living tradition passed down through generations, adapting to the changing times while retaining their essential core.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes to the depth and nuance of this topic. It's a reminder that even these ancient beliefs are never truly static.
Right.
They're constantly being reshaped and reinterpreted as we grapple with the mysteries of existence.
Well said. It's been a privilege to explore this fascinating world with you and with our listeners. I hope this deep dive has sparked a curiosity about Tibetan culture and that enduring power of myth and belief.
I'm feeling a bit awestruck by the power and resilience of these beliefs. And who knows, maybe our listeners will even feel a connection to that heavenly rope linking us all to something greater than ourselves.
It's a beautiful thought. And as always, we encourage you to continue exploring, questioning, and discovering.
Until next time, keep diving deep.